presentation by Freddy Weima. Freddy Weima is the Director General of NUFFIC, the Dutch Organization for Internationalization and International Cooperation in Education. And Freddy Weima is a graduate of the University of Amsterdam, where he studied politics, as well as at the University of San Francisco, in San Francisco State University, sorry. Could it also be true that you play guitar and sing in Frisian?
I did many things in my life, amongst those this.
Okay, excellent.
Multilingual setting, yeah.
Excellent. Well then, please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Jan Bart and David, of course, for hosting, but also thanks Rajesh and Karel Stolker for their great introductions, and of course also the inspiring words by Tijmen Rosenboom. Esteemed Excellencies, honored guests, and dear participants, thank you for permitting me to address you today. It is really great to have you all on board at Africa Knows. About a year ago, NUFFIC embarked on this journey with the African Studies Center, with this conference in mind. I'm truly proud of the program we managed to put together, even though the setting is completely different from the original plans. How the future would play out, none of us could have suspected. Never waste a good crisis. When Winston Churchill spoke these words, he was obviously not referring to a global pandemic that is thoroughly disrupting life. Nevertheless, these were wise words of an iconic leader. Given the moment he spoke those powerful words, he might not have had as much inclusion in mind as we have now. So let me also quote Orunmila, a contemporary of Socrates, the famed philosopher. Orunmila was not of Greek ancestry, so his words and teachings are not part of the standard teachings in philosophy as taught in the West. That doesn't mean they do not have power in them as well, or are less applicable than the quote of Churchill. Orunmila states that there might be more wisdom in the world than we know of, if only we give foreign knowledge the chance to reveal its wisdom on its own terms. And that is why I am honored to be part of Africa Knows, of the conference, because we do have an actual crisis, and it would definitely be a waste to revert to the way things were before. I mention things as a general term because the opportunities for real change are plentiful. But let's make them changes that are carried by many, including those who struggle to have agency over their place in the narratives that shape our lives. We could profit by this present juncture and do not let the chances offered slip. The question is whether we will grasp it. The TVET and higher education sector as a whole is faced with a daunting task: how to make sure no one is left behind in a time of great uncertainty. As the academic year unfolds, we see in more detail all the effects this unprecedented pandemic entails. To give you an example, in a regular year, nearly 5 million students worldwide studied abroad. For instance, in July 2019, nearly 150,000 international students arrived in Australia only. In July 2020, there were only 40. In the Netherlands, these figures are not as dramatic as they are elsewhere, but we also have seen a serious decline in the number of students from outside Europe. Student mobility and scholarships have thus taken new meaning when physical travel isn't always possible. We learned from our partners that onboarding students through a digital platform is not nearly the same as welcoming them in a grand ceremony on site, and how to set up new projects, trainings, or alumni activities when whole countries or regions are in a lockdown. The shift from residential to remote learning does not only affect teachers, staff, and students. On a fundamental level, the pandemic challenges the very structures and experiences that constitute TVET and higher education. Issues such as digital divides, equity, and equality of opportunity shift even more into focus. The very chance that an entire generation will be excluded from education is real, with girls and women especially being in danger of being left behind. In the media, all focus is on the possibility of securing a vaccine as soon as possible. Understandably so. The human tragedy unfolding immediately before our eyes should require all our attention. But the disruption caused by this coronavirus does not end when a vaccine is widely available. Over 1 billion students globally are affected in one way or another. According to UNESCO, 9.8 million students on the African continent alone are affected. A large number of already at-risk youth are completely shut off from education. Some higher education institutions have transitioned smoothly to distance learning, but this has not been the case for the majority. The transition to move to a virtual environment was necessitated to curb the spread of the virus, laying bare the needs in capacity and infrastructure. Although the crisis sparked a period of innovation by our partners, we also have to conclude that no perfect online substitute exists for in-person, people-to-people contact, which has always been a vital element in building sustainable partnerships. In short, we can do more than we expected, but less than we want to do. For those of us who work in knowledge cooperation, these challenges are increasingly part of our reality, and we are combating them, knowing that they are not singular problems that can be addressed by our endeavors only. They need concerted efforts, and it is exactly in this regard that we have seen the strength of all the partnerships within knowledge institutions worldwide. This constant adaptation, combined with an outlook on the future, that is what also let us join today. No matter how the pandemic evolves in the months and maybe years ahead, the groundwork for positive change is laid with every small step taken. All of us joining digitally is one such step. Sharing and disseminating the knowledge learned today is another such step. Looking back on what has been done and reflecting on these activities in another way to improve actions for the future. We are constantly on the lookout for different perspectives, intent on including all voices in the deliberations. We have tried to do this in the past in our current capacity development efforts, such as the Orange Knowledge Program and our student mobility schemes. There are silver linings aplenty, as portrayed by the words and concepts that have entered the vernacular in this particular year. One such concept that reverberates in digital halls is the texceleration, the accelerated adaptation of all things digital. Whether that pertains to the digital transformation of education or the technology used for knowledge exchange in a broader sense, the effects are irrevocable. As a recent McKinsey report mentioned, years' worth of digital transformation have been compressed into months. In some cases, almost overnight, innovative strategy for onboarding new students were developed. Switches to blended learning were made. Transition to online learning tools and platforms, such as the ever-present Zoom platform we are using today, took place in a span of mere weeks, sometimes mere days even. We have seen how knowledge institutions from across the world reached out to each other to learn of novel approaches, to exchange experiences and ideas on improvement. Universities, higher education platforms, primary and secondary teachers, and other knowledge partners, they all have stretched themselves to adapt to the unexpected. Whatever the future holds, vaccines permitting or not, these shifts will have lasting effects. It is my conviction that residential learning will be possible again. We have to be optimistic. But I also believe that future concepts of learning will always incorporate blended forms of remote learning. And if we manage to improve access to digital forms of education, we can be way more inclusive in our programs. Another concept that I would like to share with you is that of globalization, defined here as services developed globally, adjusted to accommodate users at the local level. For education, and higher education especially, this is something we see rapidly evolving. At NUFFIC, we see how our knowledge of curriculum reform, knowledge gained in our almost 7 decades of experience, adds to the strength of our partners. But we also see how they tweak and modify and make it their own. Vice versa, local expertise that we deploy as part of our global presence strategy adds a dimension that not only strengthens the local projects, but also enriches ideas on a global level, thereby echoing the words of Oren Mila. It may well be that this amplified knowledge, local knowledge, leads to questions about the existing knowledge structures. This might have fundamental consequences on the longer term. Dear colleagues, whatever happens, I hope we will all stand for cooperation as opposed to isolation, so that we can all increase our opportunities for success. We have titled this keynote address as Rethinking the Education Ecosystem, because, as I hardly need to tell you, education does not exist in a vacuum. The acceleration I mentioned earlier will have severe knock-on effects that disrupt economies. Globalization as a concept is inspiring, but by no means on its own guarantees the inclusion of the marginalized or the disenfranchised. This demands concrete, concerted efforts. At NUFFIC, we believe education is the engine for growth. Any engine consists of thousands of parts that are all interlinked. All are vital to the overall performance, and any engine throughout the course of history has been improved upon by adding new perspectives and insights to the design. As part of decolonizing the mind, I hope that the same efforts will be put into a rethinking of the ecosystem that lies at the base of education. That policy and practice across countries and continents will be shaped with a better future in mind for each and everyone. The post-COVID world should by all means be a world permeated with positive change. It has been said 100 times before this year, so I will definitely be not the first to mention it here today. The COVID-19 pandemic can be a catalyst for change. If 2020 was the year of disruption, let 2021 be the year for change. If these past 12 months were the months of transformation, let the coming months show the fruits of these labors. And if there is but a single lesson to be learned from this pandemic, let it be that we can only overcome by joining forces. I wish you all a good conference with lots of insights and hopefully many new partnerships. Thank you. I hand over to Jan Bart again.
Thank you very, very much, Freddy Weima, the Director General of NUFFIC, the Dutch Organization for Internationalization and International Cooperation in Education. We have time for questions, and people can pose their questions at the bottom of the screen in the Q&A section. I will be assisted in this by David Erhard. And there is a question already which has been posed by Professor Tom Dietz. And his question is, how will NUFFIC combine the ambition of starting new programs in and with Africa with strengthening the many existing ones? Freddy, can you see it?
Yeah, I can't see the question himself, but you read it aloud, so thanks for that. Yeah, I think we really have to do both. So we have to invest in new initiatives. In my keynote, I refer to our global presence strategy. This year, we started with new offices and colleagues in partner countries. And I think this is a very good way to work together with our partner countries in developing new programs that are also really addressing the needs that are there today. In the meantime, we also have to keep innovating our current programs. For instance, the Orange Knowledge program is very important there, but also the programs we run specifically for refugee students, together with our partner organization, one of them present today, the Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst. I think it's also very important to develop these programs further.
Excellent, thank you very much. For those of you who are in the audience, and if you would wish to pose a question to Tijmen Rosenboom, he's also present and will also be able to answer questions if you have these questions. I will pose a question which is essentially one that is a little bit like the bull in the china shop. The political conditions in parts of the European Union are not extremely conducive in terms of international cooperation. And often the cost factor is put to the front, as it were. One of these things that you've put to the front in your presentation is precisely the issue that working together is a benefit for all of us, given the fact that we have such incredible IT development going on in Africa at the moment, in Nigeria, in Kenya, in Ghana. There's a win-win situation, and this is an issue which seems to be forgotten. Just a short comment on that, and then there'll be a further question from other people. Thank you.
Well, hopefully, I'm happy to say that when I look at our European partners, there are many partners that are really willing to work together. I already mentioned the refugee projects we are doing in the north of Africa. We do this in partnerships. In the past with the British Council, and we're still working together with DAD from Germany, but also Campus France. And I know of several other sister organizations of NUFFIC, for instance, in Norway, not an EU country, but very active in education collaboration. Our colleagues there are also very active in these programs. So I'm really happy to say that there are many partners available to work on these programs. Also, when with a little bit wider scope, NUFFIC is also responsible for the management of the Erasmus Plus program in Europe, and hopefully with some more opportunities in African countries as well in the near future. There are 30 European countries participating in the Erasmus Plus program, and they're working together closely. So even though there's at the political level, there's a lot of discussion in the countries themselves, and especially in the education sector, there's a lot of will to work together. And I think there's a strong base there, and we can work from there.
Thank you very much. The questions are starting to flow in. We have a question from Professor Marleen Dekker. Thank you for the keynote. Interesting reference to globalization approach of NUFFIC. I'm interested I'm interested in how the contextualized approach in, for instance, Africa could question existing knowledge. Could you share an example of this?
I can.
Sorry to interrupt you, Freddy, because there's another question which is coming here from Professor Felix Ameka, who's a very similar question. I'll read that question to you. Thank you very much for a very thought-provoking keynote. I was wondering whether you have some examples of globalization leading to amplified local knowledge questioning existing knowledge structures. I ask the question because, in a sense, we know that local educational systems and philosophies are different from the ones underlying higher education, say, higher education. So I'm wondering if globalization of education can really take place. So there's an example, and if whether or not it can take place.
Yeah, well, I think globalization can take place if we want it to take place. And I think this very conference is an example of the will to take of having this kind of collaboration taking place. And I know of what we did last year. As soon as the pandemic unfolded, we looked at the projects that NUFFIC was responsible for, and we really tried to work together with all our partners in order to make the programs also and the projects also effective in times of the corona pandemic. For instance, we were very active in the field of sexual reproductive health and rights. By doing so, we were in close contact with the health sector and the health faculties of many key universities in our partner countries. And because of those contacts, we could swiftly move to also working in the field of informing students, teachers, and the wider public on issues around the pandemic. And I think that's a very important way to work. So it's really important to have this full collaboration going on, making use of the networks in the partner countries.
Thank you very much. I have further questions flying in here at the moment. I have a question from Victor Ogola. Cooperation instead of isolation. How can NUFFIC identify and include African alumni in the work floor? Do they have a strategic network where Africans in the Netherlands can cooperate for holistic development?
Yes, I also read this question, and I think it's a very good point that Victor Ogola made here, because I didn't mention alumni that much in my keynote, but I think alumni relations, alumni policies are key in future collaboration, because in my previous answer, I already said something about making use of existing networks and widening them. I think a strong base for those networks is all the people that we have already welcomed in the Netherlands or in our collaboration programs, and with whom we are still in contact, also close contacts of the embassies and the knowledge institutions, both in the Netherlands and in our partner countries. So I think alumni relations are key, especially when you, referring to Victor Ogola, want to make some real change on the work floor, because the people are already there.
Thank you very much. A further question from Professor Marleen Dekker. And this is a question for Tijmen Rosenboom. So if Tijmen can be brought in. Tijmen, are you ready?
I am.
Question for Tijmen. It is good to see the increasing attention for context-specific approaches in the MFA's work. Could you share one of the examples that you are currently working on?
Yes, of course. So thank you to Professor Marleen Dekker for the question. I think in this case, I was really also referring to, context-specific approach should be part of every development intervention, because otherwise they would not be effective, first of all. But and I think that our embassies and the networks that they have and the programs and our partners actually always do this. But I was specifically also referring, in this case, very important, to the youth engagement, because very often you see that in a population where 70% of the people are actually young people, it makes a lot of sense to be context specific. It makes a lot of sense to be actually making sure you get the specific challenges and opportunities of young people on board. So I would say in that regard, there are some advancements we're trying to make. For example, what I mentioned, the Youth Advisory Committee that we're launching. On the other hand, also, of course, that the virtual forum that we had was also a way to get this. But within our programs, I guess it's most important, actually, because it's all okay if we are context specific, let's say here in The Hague, but that's not the context we need. So it's actually in our program, in the work we're doing, that we need to be context specific. And in our programming, the new programs we're launching, we more and more try to integrate also this voice of young people to make sure that it's context specific. The Challenge Fund works on this, which I know you are aware of. Challenge Fund for Youth Employment really tries to have actually young people involved to make sure that the analysis on the ground is actually connected to what they see and it's youth-led. Same goes for a lot of our programs in the humanitarian sphere, for example, in our Prospects partnership and the work we do with UNICEF and Generation Unlimited, to make sure that young people are throughout the process, not just in the analysis phase, but also afterwards are involved to make sure it's context specific. And that context is young.
Thank you very, very much. Now we are going to attempt to do something which may or may not work, but I see that there is a request from Tom Dietz to be asking a question live. I'm going to ask the good people at Nomad IT if they can bring up Tom Dietz so that he can answer this question, or that he can ask the question live. Tom, I hope that you're ready. Tom is there, and he's going to unmute you have to unmute your microphone.
For sure. Thank you.
And we're there. Perfect. Go for it.
Yeah. Yes, one of the things that really puzzles me is this word capacity development. My question to NUFFIC, in fact, is: are you still using that word, or are you completely shifting to the concept co-creation, or concepts that are away from this capacity development paternalism?
Hello, Tan. Very good to see you, and
yes.
Thanks for being part of making this conference possible. I think you're right. We're not using the word capacity development that much anymore. When you look at our strategy, the first line is NUFFIC stands for International Cooperation and Internationalization in Education. It's really about the cooperation. It's always two-way cooperation. The themes of this conference, the decolonizing the mind, I think that's part of that, and that we really have to look at partnerships, and that's why I really like the questions about alumni, because our alumni are full partners. It is not capacity that has to be built somehow, but we want to work together.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Tom, are you satisfied with this answer?
Oh, yes, for sure. Very good.
Well, that's perfect, because that means that we are exactly on time to be able to move to the next section.